Hello, everybody. Thank you all again so much for tuning in to the Think BRICS Epstein Files. My name is Ben Epstein, and I'm super thrilled for you to join us on today's program. If you have any comments, or if you want to help decide what topic I cover in the next week, please be sure to, put your suggestions in the comments section, as well as, like the video and subscribe to the channel. So, and obviously, if you guys have any other questions or, about what we're going to cover today, as well as other topics, please be sure to drop them in the comments section. That's why we have it there. So I'll be looking at that throughout if you guys have anything to say or think you need to add. So, I really wanted to talk about the recent developments with Niger and specifically with the uranium market. And I find the news interesting for uh, a lot of reasons. But in just the last few years, to give you guys context about uranium in general, so the price of uranium, which is obviously the foundational fuel of this potentially new nuclear age, has exploded from August of 2023, we saw prices at around $58 per pound. And now, or, in February 2024, it nearly doubled. It went to, $106 per pound. And even with these prices as high as they've been, it's going to be a lot of volatility throughout. And we'll see how Niger and their stockpile of uranium and how they are pivoting to non-French buying partners for uranium, how that's going to impact the uranium market, in the long term. So, why this sudden and dramatic uptick in the price of uranium, right? So obviously we can look at the demand side first. So the global demand has surged obviously for uranium, for the idea of cheap and reliable energy and increased pressure to rely more on the renewable energy resources as by COP30 goals or what have you. And another big reason now is because of artificial intelligence and, in particular, data centers. So, on the global supply chain, or on data centers in particular, they're going to need obviously a lot of electricity and a lot of fuel. And normally people are using the uranium as a potential source of fuel. So, now that we know that the demand side, when we look at the supply side, we saw a lot of a rise in resource nationalism. This is something that Niger is very proud and, as important is to show that you can use the natural resources in your, in your nation as leverage for a lot of, trading deals and things of that nature. So, let's now to understand why the uranium market is as volatile as it is. Let's kind of define the history of the uranium market. Uh, it's been a history defined by boom and bust cycles. Like the modern history of uranium is basically starting with the Manhattan Project and then this massive expansion of nuclear reactors in the mid 1960s. But as we came to, but by the 1970s, prices were artificially inflated. And as a result, it resulted in this oversupply of uranium. So by the mid 1980s, with the Cold War winding down, as well as sort of this accidents with 3 Mile Island and in Chernobyl, there was a lot less demand for nuclear power or in uranium in particular. So it really took a massive slump by the end of the Cold War. And by the mid 2000s, the uranium prices actually got to nearly $140 a pound. But in 2011, the Fukushima disaster happened as a result of the tsunami that rocked Japan. And a lot of investment was the brakes were slammed in that regard. So when we think about the uh, the history of the uranium market, it's a combination of this fear of basically the potential that uranium has, but also the oversupply that created a generation of utility fuel buyers who operated under a lot of supply and not a lot of price pressure. But now, as we are transitioning now with the massive surge of demand, things are really going to start to change. So, when we talk about this new demand, obviously, we talked about how the AI data centers are going to could be in need of a lot more power, as well as just the need for nuclear energy as a potential source of fuel. It creates this fractious fuel cycle, as I will now call it, where the concentration of the mining production for uranium and the concentration of the midstream processing of the uranium, it makes the system very vulnerable to a lot of the geopolitical tensions that we're seeing especially unfold now. And that's why that Niger's big move to, remove any sort of French influence in the West African region in that area and pivot their resources towards countries in BRICS in particular, such as, India, as well as Russia, Iran, and China. So now that we know about this real surge in need for uranium, who are sort of the biggest producers and obviously the uh, you know, countries with the most demand or the biggest consumers, right? Well, interestingly, Niger, in terms of producing uranium, they are the seventh biggest country uh, in uranium production. But the three countries that are responsible for three quarters of the global output of uranium production are Kazakhstan, Canada, and Australia. So when we look at Kazakhstan to start, because they are the world's largest producer and uh, nearly represents about 40% of the global output for uranium. What's very interesting about Kazakhstan and their uranium production is they use this method called the in situ recovery method, or ISR, and it is favorable in their environment because Kazakhstan is very mountainous and the average production costs are a lot lower than the global average is. For Kazakhstan, in this case, the ISR allows them to, produce at 16 to $24 per pound. So once Kazakhstan is able to bring up the uh, technological gap, once they're able to modernize their own nuclear processing and their own uh, infrastructure, energy infrastructure, they will be in a much more strategic position, not just for the Central Asian region, but also in this multipolar world that we're seeing unfolding, that Kazakhstan will become more and more relevant as the years go by. Canada is the second largest miner and the notable brands, I should say, the notable companies is Cameco, who obviously is the they've increased the production of uranium from 18 million to 25 million pounds of uranium by 2025. So they, in particular, with the whole Northern American market, Cameco is an incredibly important, producer, but also Canada even in of itself for the Northern American and European markets is a key supplier of uranium, as well as Australia, which has 28% of the largest amount of reserves total. And the companies like ASX or Boss Energy and Deep Yellow are the biggest companies in Australia as part of expanding the capacity and projects, um, such as the Honeymoon ISR project in South Australia to produce uranium or, to refine it and all that. So now while they are the biggest producers, as we're saying, like from the mining and extraction end, what's important to understand about this is the Russia in particular has a very important part at the midstream of processing the uranium. So after it's extracted, it has this yellow cake. It's called yellow cake, and it's what Niger primarily has. But for to make the mined yellow cake to reactor fuel, it involves, fuel conversion and also enrichment, which is where Russia has a lot of the strategic advantage and the investment along the whole midstream and refinement of the process. So, um, we see that Russia has an important part in the midstream of, uranium. And what's interesting is that they have this trading relationship with the United States, and that still goes on for uranium. It's actually there's actually an important how the ownership of the Zaporizhia plant is split 50-50 is is something worth talking about another time. But the point is that the United States buys 60% of its uranium from uh and 44% of that capacity to convert that uranium from Russia and China. So for Russia, this is actually a very important trading relationship, not just sort of in the scale of what they're trading, obviously, but the amount and the amount that Russia benefits from annually, even as we can obviously see that with the conflict, with the special military operation in Ukraine right now, that it seems them training uranium is such an odd and foolhardy idea. So aside from Russia having its own footprint in this process, China also has entities such as the CNNC and the CGN, who are also trying to rapidly expand their own influence in the uranium market. So, like we talked about with Kazakhstan, China has acquired stakes in these Kazakh uranium mines with Russia's Rosatom subsidiary known as the Uranium One Group, and they sold a significant stake in their joint venture to China's state nuclear uranium resource development company. I know it's a very long, they need a big asterisk for it. But this dynamic of China's expanding influence and also it acquiring stakes in Kazakhstan and working with, you know, Rosatom subsidiary, for example, really highlights the geopolitical lines that are being drawn across this supply chain where, you know, um, Kazakhstan and Namibian supply is increasingly oriented towards Russia, China, and India. You see, Canadian mining supplies are more so geared towards North America and European markets. So we can see that we have these big fault lines between the idea with uranium on. So Niger's most recent change, we're going to see how do we think Niger opening its trading relationships with other partners is going to impact in terms of the geopolitics of it, but also the economics of it in just a second. If you guys have any questions on what we've been discussing so far, namely the big drivers in the uranium market, please be sure to put them in the comments. Okay. So I know that it took a lot of time to lay the groundwork of this, but I promise it's all going to come full circle on this, towards this latter half of the discussion here. So, what should we know about Niger's recent pivot? So, for one thing, the um, in recent headlines, Niger is actively going to be or is in advanced negotiations with countries such as India, Russia, China, as well as Iran and the UAE, for example, on acquiring uranium, all of which for different reasons. But if we think about how important Niger was for France's supply of uranium for their own energy infrastructure, because remember, in terms of sort of the energy production, very much in the EU, France was a massive standout in terms of their own nuclear energy production until very recently they shut down these plants. But a big reason for it was because of how much uranium it had. So Niger has accounted for nearly a quarter of the natural uranium that has been supplied to European power plants in 2022. And for decades, its relationship was almost exclusively with France, right? Because France was its colonial occupier for as long as it was. And it depended on Nigerian uranium for its own ambitions. But after, after the government was I don't want to after the change in the government led by the National Council for the Safeguard of the Homeland, or the CNSP, they ousted President Mohamed Bazoum, who was a lot more aligned with France, obviously. And ever since the CNSP took over, they have actively eroded any sort of French military and political influence and have aggressively pivoted their market towards countries like Russia and China. So let me just highlight the advanced talks with each of these countries in particular. So Russia is wants to buy around 1,000 tons of Nigerian uranium at around $170 million. India wants to rely on imported uranium and also expand its civilian nuclear program that it has with a lot of the diplomatic ties it has in African nations. Iran, in particular, wants to acquire 300 tons of refined uranium or yellow cake in terms of, or in exchange for drones and surface to air missiles. And the UAE is also a big investor in the African region through their sovereign wealth funds. All of this is to say, Niger's ability to pivot themselves and see the opportunities that all these countries are waiting and knocking on the door and waiting in line to come to a deal with them is going to have a massive impact on not just their own country, but also in the African region. And the fact that the United States and France in particular have lost a lot of the market opportunity in this region because of, quite frankly, the French's colonial influence and also the United States' current colonial influence around the world. All of that supply is completely gone from them, and now it makes Kazakhstan in particular that much more important we had a recent meeting with the United States and Kazakhstan for a similar reason because of the raw resources that Kazakhstan has. Now, in terms of, when we think of BRICS nations and ways that they can benefit from this, I think there's a lot of different ways they can in particular. If we talk about the projects that are going around in Africa to, things such as the Belt and Road Initiative that is going to improve, infrastructure, transportation, unlocking these development corridors to integrate the cities in the country to help develop it faster and make it grow more. Stuff like refining their own nuclear industry is going to be paramount to doing that incredibly cheaper. And the advancements that a lot of these nations in BRICS in particular have made towards towards nuclear energy is something that's incredibly important, not just for Niger, but all of them collectively. They'll be able to harness the power of nuclear energy because of the expertise that countries like China, India, and Russia have with all of their resources and the research that they've done up to this point, and they'll be willing to share this information with Niger to improve their own nuclear production capabilities. And then this can be exported all across Africa. The potential is there's such an unbelievable potential here to revolutionize the development of Africa, and this is a major reason for it. And one way that we can see the innovation that the nuclear industry will have, not just on energy, obviously, but sort of the uranium that's normally not used is sort of the I don't think it's called DU. I believe it's called discarded uranium, and it's used a lot for medicine and cancer research. So even something in the medical field or developing small modular reactors that are kind of being developed with these thorium reactors that China had a massive breakthrough with recently, they could be set up and lead the African continent in developing these small modular reactors and transform the continent forever. And they have the resources to and the knowledge and the expertise when talking with all the different BRICS nations to make this situation possible for them. And that's something that's not just the opportunity that's lost by the West because of the influence that the French had and the impact that the French is the way that they're going to suffer now because they've lost this market access. But now the opportunity for BRICS countries to refine the capabilities and develop this more is the most important thing that Niger's pivot is showing for the world. Interestingly enough, there was a coup in Benin that was thwarted. That was the recent report. Let me see if I can actually look up the article here. And if you can look at a map of Benin, it is hilariously enough. See if I can share my screen here. And if you can see Benin here, it's what you guess it, right right next to Niger. And obviously Burkina Faso, that is part of the Sahel Republic, and also Benin, ironically enough, is next to Nigeria, which is another very important country, especially with regards to Nigeria's oil resources. And they talk from President Trump and his the possibility of military action in the area. This move is that seismic that they tried to establish this coup in Benin to create chaos on Niger's borders and try to destabilize that area. So for the West in particular, they are in a very, very tough spot. And the revolution and this renaissance in nuclear power can truly transform the world forever if BRICS takes the lead role and really puts the pedal to the floor and creating and revolutionizing, clean energy production as well as multiple different, types of, you know, cancer treatments and equipment. So that is that is my main report on the uranium industry and how Niger's pivot is really going to make the ripple effects for the uranium market for years to come. I am going to close the Epstein files, but I am going to stick around if you guys wanted to share your thoughts on this presentation. If you guys had any questions you want to ask or any suggestions that you want me to look up that you think are relevant. Yeah, Susan, thorium is the future nuclear powered, and it's where the industry is heading. It is insane that this technology was originally developed by the United States, and um, they just stopped. The United States stopped investing and stopped putting time and effort into using thorium, and China took it. And after decades and decades of research, this breakthrough is going to completely transform their own economy, but also the economies that are partnered in the Belt and Road Initiative. Like having these small modular reactors to have a source of energy that can help connect a lot of these different communities and completely speed up construction projects. It is going to change the game forever. Okay. Yeah, okay. So I'm gonna close today's BRICS Epstein files. I do want to thank everyone for joining me today. If you guys have any suggestions on what you'd like me to talk about in the future, please put it down in the comment section because next week, and I know that you guys have been super interested about this, we're going to be covering the recent movements in gold from a lot of the BRICS central banks. So shifting from one really important resource in uranium to another in gold. And I really look forward to talking to you guys next time on our discussion of gold. And we'll talk again soon.